It's my great pleasure to introduce Oliver Shah. Ollie is the Associate Editor and Leader Writer on the Sunday Times. He also writes a must-read column every week on React News. He's probably best known for his investigative work into the collapse of Philip Green's empire and his book Damaged Goods, and some of the interesting interactions he's had with Philip and a colourful choice of language along the way. You can listen to his book too, read by Ollie. So what we're going to do today is just to talk about the broader prospects of things, to talk a bit about the economy, about planning and about the markets. I'm also mindful of the fact that it's us that's keeping you from a drink. So just to start with the economy, we've obviously got a new government. The new government has started by Starmer positioning himself for a tough budget in October, with Rachel Reeves positioning the situation with the dreadful black hole she's been left with of a 22 billion black hole. But actually the hand's not that bad. Inflation is under control and stabilised. Last month we had the Bank of England with the first long heralded reduction in base rate to 5%. And in the first half of the year, although it's slowed now, UK GDP topping the G7. So actually we're into a better place. So Ollie, talk us through where you see the economy going from here, and probably very important to this audience, how you see interest rates changing.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Great to be here. As you say, I wouldn't disagree with any of that introduction in terms of where we are broadly. Labour, you can see, are trying to do the George Osborne, David Cameron 2010 playbook, aren't they, in terms of make sure the muck from the previous government sticks to the Tories and they start fighting the next election now. The big downside of that for everyone else is the sort of Rose Garden gloominess, the broken society, broken economy stuff does hold back animal spirits. And to your point, inflation's coming down, almost back to target. Rates are on a downward path. Everyone can see that. Look at the OBR, which is among the more cautious forecasters out there. 2% a year, pretty steadily up until 2028. And I go around and speak to plenty of CEOs in different sectors, and I'm sure you all do as well. UK PLC's in pretty good shape. It's come through Brexit, COVID, high inflation. People have got costs down. Balance sheets are in decent state. Consumers are still not in the mood for a recession and are still spending. And the ingredients are there for a much more upbeat narrative, and it's a bit frustrating to see Labour doing what it's doing politically, even if it's understandable, because I think the missing ingredient for a lot of people has been sentiment around the UK, inward sentiment from global investors and domestic sentiment, and all that political churn of the past 8 years, isn't it, really, since Brexit. I think there've been 13 or 16 housing ministers since then. We'll get on to planning, but I mean, it's. I had lunch with some guys who ran some housing associations, and one guy was talking about a particular scheme that's taken a while. I think since 2016. He said we've been through double-digit number of housing ministers while we've been trying to do one scheme. Have to keep sort of meeting the new one, introducing themselves. So that lack of churn and political stability, I think, is really helpful underpinning for the economy. You just need Labour to actually embrace a bit of bounce. And it's been quite bumpy politically in terms of the way they've choreographed stuff, hasn't it? Winter fuel, on a pure basis, I agree with getting rid of it, because why are we lavishing taxpayer money on a already quite well rewarded segment of the population? But to do it straight away in the way they've done on its own without doing it as part of the budget is quite weird, because it sticks out and becomes a political route. Things like the smoky and pub beer gardens, I don't think most people really, either way, get very emotional about. So there have been a few things that have been a bit bumpy and a bit odd. And maybe that's a new government cutting its teeth, but you do hope that the budget, while it's going to include some pain, as we know, also includes a bit more narrative about the future rather than the past.
Should this audience be worried about tax increases and the CGT position in particular?
Depends how affluent they are, I suppose. I bumped into a newspaper grandee in a restaurant a while ago, before the election actually, and he sort of came over and said, "I hope you've moved all your wealth offshore." And I said, "Well, I haven't really got any, so it doesn't really matter." But I think CGT is a key thing, isn't it? Everyone you see is thinking about crystallising what capital gains they have now. Labour have to be quite careful about how they do that, because I deferred to David Smith, our Sunday Times economics editor, I think the potential gains are pretty small there, and it's much more of a behavioural thing, CGT. So there's not much you can raise, really, even if you were to equalise it with the income tax rates, which I don't think they would do anyway. So they've got to be quite careful about how they incentivise entrepreneurship and building of wealth.
And just conscious of time, moving on, planning. Angela Rayner's been fast out of the traps, announcing an 8-week consultation into the national policy planning regime. She's talking about reintroducing housing targets, 1.5 million new homes in 5 years. She's talking about relaxing rules to allow more dense development on brownfield sites, cunningly redefining some of the green belt as grey belt, which naturally makes grey much less emotive than green, and enables a closing in of that. And as a fisherman, something I'm very concerned about, relaxing the rules on water neutrality and that side of things. Our rivers are in bad enough state as it is. Do you actually think that's going to achieve the aim?
Digby is very much a fisherman, by the way, because I wrote a column about John Lewis recently, and I referred to their Leckford farm estate, and I said you could catch rainbow trout in the river. And he texted me on Sunday and said, no, they're only brown trout in the river. So absolutely not lying about that. I suppose that clumsy segue, the devil will be in the detail, won't it, of all things, whether it's writing a column about fish or planning. It's going to be an immensely difficult thing to do. And they're talking about 300 new plans, well, that's less than one per English constituency. We know how
314 planning authorities in the UK, so you get 0.95 of a planner per authority under the new generous Starmer regime.
A world of plenty. Local authorities have been hollowed out by central government grant cuts, haven't they, over the past 15 years? And I suppose they protected frontline services and social care insofar as they can, and planning has been an area that's been cut. So there's a big rebuild there in terms of capability. I know people like Tony Blair talk about using AI more to enhance the functioning of government, but you think it's going to be a long time before you get algorithms deciding planning applications. The Tony Blair Institute has done quite a lot of work around planning, and I know Labour have been very influenced by that, and it's not just on the residential side, but things like big infrastructure projects. We interviewed him about 6 months ago, and he was talking about, in his words, since 2012 to now, the time it's taken to get a big piece of infrastructure approved has increased by 65%. So Rachel Reeves, when they first came in, I think was talking about reviewing the planning policy frameworks or the planning statements around infrastructure to try and speed that up. Directionally it's all good, but it's going to be difficult, isn't it? And each individual area, you would guess, is going to fight certain things. I wrote an article for Green Street News. It's now called Not React, since their takeover. And I found some rankings of the top councils for turning stuff down. And Mole Valley, which is in Surrey and is Lib Dem controlled, rejected, I think, 3/4 of all applications it got last year. And when there's that level of intransigence and that amount of presumably local consent for blocking new stuff, central government's going to have quite a power struggle with local government, isn't it? And you've got some Labour MPs who have supplanted Tory MPs in fairly leafy seats, and you would guess NIMBYism at the MP level is sort of driven by self-interest and the electorate rather than any innate belief.
And the other piece that isn't being addressed is actually what happens with the main infrastructure providers, with the Environment Agency, with the Highways Agency, with Natural England, all of those bodies, the Planning Inspectorate, they haven't got any more people. So even if you get through the first phase of the planning cycle, you then get held up at all of those phases. I've been involved in a very big scheme, and there are 68 different statutory bodies involved in that. And we're 4.5 years down the line and we've got nowhere. And it's just about impossible the way it gets backed up. And there's got to be a lot more investment in that.
Supply chains, you would guess, are not ready for a big expansion, are they, in activity? Bricks, brickies and materials.
Yeah. Moving on, let's just talk about the markets for a minute. And there's some quite gloomy stuff on the logistics market. And I have to say I'd seen a more positive perspective on that, with some individual transactions starting to come through, the bid-ask gap closing, and some of the couple of corporate transactions that were announced last week. But playing to Ollie's speciality in the retail market, we've seen a lot of corporate activity there. In the last couple of months, we've seen 4 situations with JV partners taking each other out at Meadowhall, at Cripps Causeway, at Ebbsfleet, Bluewater, sorry. Are we actually, is the retail market actually, it's been in the doldrums for longest of all of the sectors. Are we getting back to a place where actually the volume's going to come back into the market and that market's going to start to trade again?
Yeah, you mentioned the
capital side.
Mentioned the Philip Green story. I mean, Sunday Times has always loved telling stories through people, and he was a great vehicle for telling that high street reckoning story. And I started covering retail around 2013, and probably the next 10 years after that were brutal, weren't they, in terms of CVAs, administrations. You look at the better operators like Next, and you look at their annual report, and you look at the rent savings they're getting on, or were getting for many years on renegotiation, sort of minus 30% every year, minus 30%, just again and again and again. And it feels like in terms of occupier demand and rental stuff, it's kind of gone like that, and then sort of flatlined a bit, like beep, 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 and there's maybe some signs of vital life starting to reappear. And I guess rents have been rebased so aggressively, haven't they? And big centres, in many cases, have been through some sort of process like Trafford, where there's been a big financial restructuring, and that's allowed new owners or new equity to accept different levels of rent. And I think on the occupier side, in those better centres, people talk about decent occupiers like Zara, H&M, wanting bigger units, expanding, maybe wanting bigger units in fewer places all around the country, but still taking more space in the best centres. And in terms of capital markets, this is all anecdotal, but I think it's always interesting when you get to an inflection point, not looking so much at the kind of big beasts like Hammerson, who sort of carry on trying to keep going as they are, but look at who's that's polite. look at who's sort of doing the entrepreneurial buying, and things like the Uxbridge. One of the centres in Uxbridge traded quite recently, off about 17%, I think. But there was some really interesting entrepreneurial money in there, and people who are involved in it say to me, well, there's options around, you could do some more resi on there, and you could recut it, and you could do something with the car park. And I just think things have reached that level now where actually there's sustainable rental levels in the better centres, and there's value there, and things have sort of hit a bottom. Been through all the restructurings, and I'm sure Interpath have had a nice time with all the CVAs and the admins. But we're sort
so in my finest Laura Kunsberg, the capital market's going to come back in retail. Where are we? Do you see that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's going to be high yielding stuff, isn't it? And it's going to be capital values are still way down from where they were, and it's not easy to see a route back to the heady world of 10 years ago. But I think in terms of activity and things trading, we're reaching that stage.
Yeah. Just moving on lastly to the office sector, and my old stamping ground, I suppose. And I think that's the market where there is the biggest divide actually still between the capital market and the occupational market. In London, in the first half of this year, the turnover in the capital markets on offices was about 26% down on last year and 40% down on 2017-18. And that just hasn't come back, and there is still a massive gap in terms of where capital values are held and the yields there with what people want to buy at today. Do you see that being? I mean, there's a wall of money out there, but we're still not seeing it turn around. Interestingly, from a Hollis point of view, and you see the work that we've been doing over the last 2 or 3 months, we've been doing a massive number of TDD surveys on big office assets, preparing those to come to the market, and the data rooms are being put together on those. But it's going to be interesting what happens at City Point. What do you think?
Digby asked me to be a bit contentious, so you can blame him. But I do think property as an industry has many good points. One of the less good points is it tends to be a bit of a herd mentality and a bit of a refusal to accept reality when we're at turning points. And you saw that with retail for years. Every retail owner you saw said, our assets are fine, it's all the other ones that are doomed, and we own the best stuff, it's all fine. I think you hear a bit of a similar thing in offices, and by no means all the office market, but a lot of it is going to go through a similar reckoning to retail, where certain stuff's going to go down to land value, you would imagine, need to be completely reimagined. The sort of dirty stuff that doesn't meet EPC requirements and isn't in a good location. I think, whereas retail all came down, didn't it, and the really bad stuff kind of went even further, you sense prime offices are going to still be in demand, and they're going to stay pretty much where they were, but it's a question of how big that part of the market is. I think really good central London, central Manchester stuff, which is top EPC rating, or the sort of post EPC. I'm sorry, it's probably the wrong thing, given we've been told it's EPC didn't match proper energy consumption. But the properly sort of brilliant stuff, which has breakout spaces and roof terrace and meets the top environmental credentials, is going to keep on being in demand by occupiers, and then it's still going to have good value on a capital markets basis. But I think that's going to be an island, and around that is going to be quite a sharp drop-off in terms of values. And you look at stuff like One Poultry, I forget exactly where that's got to, but that's sort of, the debt was out of the money there in the end, wasn't it? And you would have thought that would be a pretty solid location right opposite the Bank of England.
Yeah. And the occupational side is really interesting because, with the move to hybrid working and people trying, the employer trying to get people back in the office, the flight to quality is so evident. Look at the take-up in the first half of the year, 77% grade A. And the real issue is going to be the repurposing of the rest, frankly. I was with some of my old agency colleagues last night, absolutely nailed on that city rents, prime rents are going to be £100 a foot within the next 18 months. And the difference between that, and we've seen those big rents in the West End, but they've all been on 10 and 15,000 foot units. In the city, if you look at the Citadel deal and things like that at Finsbury Avenue, those are big deals at rents, hundreds of thousands of feet, at rents in three figures. And that's, of course, cost push, because you can't afford to build a building like Finsbury Avenue unless you're getting those rents. And it's really interesting. So, I think that's interesting. As Adrian's sitting there, and we're contemporaries, and we're probably both going into our fifth property cycle, which is rather scary. So to give Ollie the last word on this, we're going into that next phase of the cycle. Grounds for optimism?
I think so. Selectively. I've written some columns on this for Green Street. I think it's going to be much more of a stock pickers cycle, isn't it, and an asset class pickers cycle. And it's going to be harder to generalise, not least because we haven't got that underpinning of QE and super low rates we had last time, which lifted everything other than retail, which was structurally very challenged. So I think selectively there are going to be great opportunities. And to the office point, I was in New York last year, and speaking to a lot of agents and investors there. And some of the entrepreneurial money, the kind of money that bought the Uxbridge shopping centre, is coming out to play now in offices in New York, and secondary offices, which are pretty tired, bad vintage, built in the 50s and 60s, and sort of bad shaped floor plates and that kind of thing. And people are coming in, opportunistic money is coming in and buying that stuff, and it is starting to trade. So I think when that starts happening in offices, that's going to be interesting here.